In August 2023, a 29-year-old wildlife photographer from Seattle vanished without a trace deep within Olympic National Park, leaving behind only his abandoned campsite and a camera filled with disturbing images. But 1 year later, a marine biologist conducting routine research in the park's coastal waters would discover something so chilling that it would change everything investigators thought they knew about Ethan Morrison's disappearance. Rachel Chen sat in her small apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, the morning light filtering through rain-streaked windows as she stared at the calendar on her kitchen wall. August 15, 2024. Exactly 1 year since Ethan had driven his weathered Subaru Outback toward the Olympic Peninsula, promising to return in 5 days with photographs that would launch his career. The silence in the apartment felt heavier than usual. She had grown accustomed to the quiet, but anniversary dates had a way of making absence echo louder than ever. Rachel reached for her coffee cup, her fingers trembling slightly as she brought it to her lips. The bitter warmth did nothing to chase away the chill that had settled in her chest 12 months ago. Her phone buzzed against the wooden table, startling her from her thoughts. Detective Kevin Walsh's name appeared on the screen, and Rachel's heart skipped. In the past 6 months, his calls had become increasingly rare, each one carrying less hope than the last. "Detective Walsh," she answered, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. "Rachel, I need you to come down to the station. We've received some new information about Ethan's case." The words hit her like a physical blow. New information. After a year of silence, of dead ends and false leads, those 2 words carried the weight of possibility and terror in equal measure. "What kind of information?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'd rather discuss it in person." "Can you be here within the hour?" Rachel was already reaching for her keys before he finished speaking. "I'm on my way." The drive to the Seattle Police Department passed in a blur of familiar streets that seemed somehow different today, charged with an electricity she hadn't felt since those first desperate weeks after Ethan's disappearance. She parked hastily and hurried through the glass doors, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floors as she made her way to Detective Walsh's desk. Kevin Walsh looked older than his 45 years, the stress of countless unsolved cases etched into the lines around his eyes. He had been assigned to Ethan's case from the beginning, and Rachel had grown to trust his methodical approach, even when it felt maddeningly slow. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I know. This day is difficult for you." Rachel sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What did you find?" Detective Walsh opened a thick file folder, revealing photographs and documents she had seen many times before. But there was something new, a set of images clipped to the top of the stack that made her breath catch. "These came to us yesterday, from Dr. Robert Sinclair, a marine biologist conducting research in the Olympic coastal region. He was collecting water samples near Rialto Beach when he discovered something unusual." He slid the first photograph across the desk. Rachel leaned forward, squinting at what appeared to be a close-up image of something metallic partially buried in dark sand. "What am I looking at?" she asked. "Ethan's camera lens, the telephoto lens from his Nikon system." Dr. Sinclair found it embedded in the sand approximately 3 miles south of where Ethan's campsite was located. Rachel's heart began to race. They had searched that area extensively in the weeks following Ethan's disappearance. Park rangers, search and rescue teams, even volunteer groups had combed every inch of the coastline within a 10-mile radius of his last known location. "How is that possible?" she whispered. "We looked everywhere." Detective Walsh's expression was grim. "That's what makes this discovery so concerning. According to Dr. Sinclair's analysis, the lens shows signs of having been submerged in salt water for an extended period. But here's what's really troubling." He placed a second photograph on the desk. This one showed the lens from a different angle, and Rachel could see scratches and gouges in the metal that looked deliberate, almost like claw marks. Dr. Sinclair believes these markings were made by marine life, specifically something large. Enough and aggressive enough to leave gouges this deep in metal. Rachel stared at the image, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. You think something in the water? We don't know what to think yet, Detective Walsh said carefully. But this changes our entire understanding of what might have happened to Ethan. We're reopening the investigation with a focus on the coastal areas and the possibility that his disappearance wasn't limited to the forest. The room seemed to spin around Rachel as she absorbed this information. For a year, she had imagined Ethan lost somewhere in the dense wilderness of Olympic National Park, perhaps injured and unable to call for help, or worse, the victim of some tragic accident. But this suggested something far more unsettling. I want to see where it was found, she said suddenly. Detective Walsh shook his head. Rachel, I understand the impulse, but the area is currently restricted while we conduct our investigation. Then I want to talk to this Dr. Sinclair. I need to understand what he thinks happened. The detective studied her face for a long moment, and she could see him weighing his words carefully. I can arrange a meeting, but I want you to prepare yourself for the possibility that what we learn might be difficult to accept. Rachel met his gaze steadily. Detective, I've spent the last year preparing myself for the worst possible news. Whatever Dr. Sinclair found, whatever it means, I need to know. Ethan deserves to have the truth brought to light. As she left the police station, clutching a copy of Dr. Sinclair's contact information, Rachel felt something she hadn't experienced in months: purpose. The lens represented the first tangible clue they had found since Ethan's empty campsite, and despite the ominous implications, it meant that answers might finally be within reach. The rain had stopped, and thin shafts of sunlight were breaking through the clouds as she walked back to her car. For the first time in a year, Rachel Chen allowed herself to feel something that resembled hope, even as a deeper part of her wondered if some truths were better left buried beneath the dark waters of the Pacific Northwest. The drive to the University of Washington's Marine Biology Lab took Rachel through neighborhoods she had avoided for months. Every coffee shop, every bookstore, every familiar corner reminded her of walks she had taken with Ethan, plans they had made, conversations about his dream of documenting the Pacific Northwest's hidden wildlife. Ethan Morrison had been different from other photographers she knew. Where others chased dramatic landscapes or sought the perfect sunset, he was obsessed with capturing moments that revealed nature's secrets. He would spend hours waiting in uncomfortable positions, his camera trained on a seemingly empty patch of forest, knowing that patience would eventually reward him with something extraordinary. Most people see the obvious, he had told her just weeks before his disappearance. But the real magic happens in the spaces between what we expect to find. Those words echoed in Rachel's mind as she parked outside the Marine Sciences Building, a modern structure of glass and steel that seemed to rise from the waters of Portage Bay. She checked her phone for Dr. Sinclair's office number and made her way through corridors that smelled of salt water and scientific equipment. Dr. Robert Sinclair was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with the kind of deep tan that came from spending most of his time outdoors. His office was cluttered with marine specimens in jars, research papers, and photographs of underwater ecosystems. He stood as she entered, his expression sympathetic but cautious. Ms. Chen, thank you for coming. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Rachel took the chair he offered, noting the way his eyes seemed to assess her, as if trying to determine how much difficult truth she could handle. Detective Walsh told me you found Ethan's camera lens. I need to understand what you think it means. Dr. Sinclair moved to his desk and retrieved a clear plastic container holding the lens. Even through the protective casing, Rachel could see the deep scratches that marred its surface. I've been studying marine ecosystems along the Olympic coast for 15 years, he said, setting the container where she could examine it. I've seen what happens when man-made objects spend time in our waters. This is different. He pulled up a series of photographs on his computer, each showing the lens from various angles. The scratches were even more pronounced in the high-resolution images, forming distinct patterns that looked almost deliberate. These markings are consistent with predatory behavior, Dr. Sinclair explained. Something large investigated this object, tested it, tried to determine if it was food or threat. Rachel leaned closer to the screen. What kind of animal could make marks like that? That's what concerns me. The depth and spacing of these gouges suggest something significantly larger than any known marine predator in our regional waters. He clicked to another image, this one showing microscopic analysis of the metal fragments found embedded in the scratches. I've found traces of an unusual protein compound in these gouges. It's organic, definitely biological, but it doesn't match anything in our existing databases of Pacific Northwest marine life. The room felt suddenly colder. Rachel wrapped her arms around herself, trying to process what she was hearing. Are you saying there's something unknown living in those waters? Dr. Sinclair hesitated, clearly choosing his words carefully. I'm saying that 15 years of research has taught me to respect what we don't understand about our oceans. The deep waters off the Olympic coast are among the least explored marine environments in North America. He pulled up a bathymetric map showing the underwater topography of the region. The coastline dropped off dramatically just offshore, plunging into trenches that reached depths of over 1,000 feet. Your boyfriend was photographing wildlife, correct? Did he ever mention any unusual sightings? Anything that didn't fit normal patterns? Rachel's throat tightened. He said he was tracking something. The week before he left, he kept talking about sounds he'd recorded near the water, calls that didn't match any known species. Dr. Sinclair's expression sharpened with interest. Did he play these recordings for you? No, he wanted to verify them first. Ethan was methodical about his work. He never shared anything until he was certain it was legitimate. The biologist stood and walked to his window, gazing out at the water beyond the campus. Ms. Chen, I think your boyfriend may have discovered something that was better left undisturbed. The storage unit smelled of cardboard and dust, a stark contrast to the crisp ocean air Rachel had left behind at the university. She hadn't been here since the week after Ethan's disappearance, when she had frantically searched through his equipment for any clue about where he might have gone. Now, 11 months later, she approached his organized chaos with different eyes. Dr. Sinclair's words echoed in her mind as she pulled the chain that illuminated the small space. Boxes of camera gear, tripods, and filing cabinets, filled with meticulously labeled research, created a shrine to Ethan's passion. Rachel moved directly to the cabinet marked Audio Recordings 2023. Ethan had been as methodical about sound as he was about photography, often spending hours in post-production analyzing the ambient audio that accompanied his visual work. She found the folder labeled Olympic Peninsula, July 2023, and felt her pulse quicken. Inside were dozens of small digital recording devices, each marked with dates, times, and GPS coordinates. She grabbed the most recent ones, dated just days before his disappearance, and noticed something that made her stomach drop. His usually neat handwriting had become increasingly erratic, and several devices were marked with a single word: confirmed. Her hands shook as she gathered the recordings, and Ethan's laptop from its protective case. Back in her car, she connected the first device and pressed play, expecting to hear the familiar sounds of Pacific Northwest wilderness. Instead, what emerged from her speakers was unlike anything she had ever heard. It started as a low rumble, so deep it was almost subsonic, like the distant approach of thunder. But this sound had structure, rhythm, almost like breathing. Then came the calls, haunting vocalizations that seemed to rise from the depths of something vast and ancient. Rachel's skin prickled as she listened. The sounds were organic, definitely animal, but they possessed an intelligence that was deeply unsettling. She could hear Ethan's excited breathing in the background, the subtle movement of his equipment as he adjusted recording levels. Day 12, his voice whispered suddenly through the speakers, making her jump. The calls are getting stronger. It's definitely responding to the playback recordings I've been using. Tomorrow I'm going to try a different approach." The recording ended abruptly. Rachel's hands trembled as she loaded the next file, dated August 13th, just 2 days before Ethan vanished. This time, the quality was different. Clearer, closer. The deep rumbling was accompanied by what sounded like movement through water, massive displacement that created waves audible even through the recording equipment. "It's huge!" Ethan's voice was barely a whisper, filled with awe and something else, fear. "I can see the disturbance in the water. It's at least 50 feet from the tip of the wake to where it disappears. Maybe larger." Rachel paused the recording, her heart hammering. She pulled out her phone and called Dr. Sinclair, grateful when he answered immediately. "Dr. Sinclair, I found Ethan's recordings. You need to hear these. Can you bring them to my lab? I'm on my way." 20 minutes later, she sat in Dr. Sinclair's office as the strange calls filled the space between them. The biologist's expression grew increasingly grave with each file they played. "Have you ever heard anything like this?" Rachel asked. Dr. Sinclair was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against his desk. "There are theories," he said finally. "Stories from indigenous communities along this coast that go back centuries. They speak of something that lives in the deepest waters, something that was here long before humans arrived." He turned to his computer and pulled up a sonar reading from his recent research expedition. 3 days ago, while collecting samples near where I found the lens, my equipment picked up something moving in the deep water channel, something large enough to register on sonar at a depth of 800 feet. The sonar image showed a massive shape, elongated and moving with purpose through the underwater canyon. "Rachel, I think your boyfriend found evidence of something that marine science has only theorized about, and I'm beginning to suspect that whatever he discovered didn't appreciate being observed." Detective Kevin Walsh arrived at Dr. Sinclair's lab within an hour of Rachel's call, his expression shifting from skepticism to concern as he listened to Ethan's final recordings. The three of them sat in the marine biologist's office as strange calls emanated from the speakers, filling the sterile academic space with sounds that seemed to belong to another world. "How certain are you that these are authentic?" Detective Walsh asked, his pen poised over his notepad. "Ethan was obsessive about documentation," Rachel replied. "He would never fabricate evidence. If anything, he was too careful, too methodical." Dr. Sinclair nodded in agreement. "The audio signatures are consistent with deep water acoustics. The frequency patterns and reverb characteristics match what we'd expect from vocalizations originating in a marine environment." Detective Walsh studied the sonar images that Dr. Sinclair had pulled up on his computer. "And you're telling me this thing you detected is still out there?" "As far as I know. My research vessel is equipped with passive monitoring equipment. We've been tracking intermittent acoustic activity in the deep channel for the past week." The detective leaned back in his chair, clearly struggling to process information that fell well outside his normal investigative experience. "I need to contact the Coast Guard. If there's something dangerous in those waters, they need to know." "Detective," Dr. Sinclair said carefully, "I understand your position, but we need to approach this situation with extreme caution. If my suspicions are correct, we may be dealing with a species that has remained hidden for very good reasons." Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" Dr. Sinclair moved to a bookshelf and retrieved a thick volume titled Indigenous: Oral Histories of the Pacific Northwest Coast. He flipped to a section marked with several bookmarks. The Makah, Quinault, and Ho tribes all have stories about what they call the Ancient One, a creature that dwells in the deepest waters off the Olympic Peninsula. According to their traditions, it's been there since before memory, and it demands respect from those who venture into its domain. He read from one of the marked passages. "The water dweller grows angry when watched by eyes that should not see. It takes those who disturb its rest, pulling them into the depths where their voices join its eternal song." Detective Walsh shifted uncomfortably. With all due respect, Dr. Sinclair, we're investigating a missing person case, not folklore. I understand your skepticism, the biologist replied. But consider this. Every major marine discovery of the past century has begun with stories that science initially dismissed. The giant squid, the megamouth shark, the coelacanth, all were myths until they weren't. Rachel's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and froze. The message was from Ethan's number. "That's impossible," she whispered, showing the screen to Detective Walsh. The message contained only coordinates: 479536 degree N, 124.6386 degree. Detective Walsh immediately pulled out his own phone and began typing. Those coordinates placed the location approximately 2 miles offshore from Rialto Beach. Deep water. Dr. Sinclair's face had gone pale. "That's the exact area where I found the camera lens." "Someone's playing a sick joke," Detective Walsh said, but his voice lacked conviction. Rachel's hands were shaking as she stared at her phone. "Ethan's been missing for a year. His phone was never found." Another message appeared. "Come alone. Midnight. Find the truth." The room fell silent except for the hum of laboratory equipment. Detective Walsh was already on his radio calling for backup and requesting Coast Guard assistance. Dr. Sinclair moved to his computer and began pulling up detailed bathymetric charts of the specified coordinates. "This is clearly some kind of trap," Detective Walsh said. "We're not letting you anywhere near those coordinates." But Rachel was studying the coordinates with a growing sense of recognition. She pulled out one of Ethan's recording devices and checked the GPS data embedded in the files. "Detective, look at this. The coordinates in the text message match exactly with the location of Ethan's final recording." Dr. Sinclair leaned over her shoulder to examine the data. "That's not a coincidence. Someone either has access to your boyfriend's equipment or—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Rachel looked up at both men, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. "Whatever sent that message knows what happened to Ethan. I'm going to be there at midnight." "Absolutely not," Detective Walsh said firmly. "This could be the person responsible for Ethan's disappearance trying to lure you into the same trap." But as Rachel stared at the coordinates on her screen, she felt a strange certainty settling over her. After a year of questions without answers, someone or something was finally offering to reveal the truth. And despite the danger, she knew she couldn't walk away from the only real lead they'd had since Ethan vanished into the depths of Olympic National Park. The rental boat cut through the dark waters of the Pacific, its engine a low rumble that seemed insignificant against the vast expanse of ocean surrounding them. Rachel sat in the stern, her hands gripping the GPS device that would guide them to the coordinates from the mysterious text message. Despite Detective Walsh's protests, she had insisted on making the midnight rendezvous, though she had agreed to his demand that she not go alone. Dr. Sinclair operated the boat with practiced ease, his face grim in the green glow of the navigation instruments. Detective Walsh sat between them, one hand on his radio and the other resting on his service weapon. Coast Guard vessels maintained a perimeter 2 miles out, ready to respond if the situation turned dangerous. "We're approaching the coordinates," Dr. Sinclair announced, throttling back the engine. The sudden quiet was unsettling, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the hull. Rachel checked her phone. 11:58 p.m. Her heart hammered as she scanned the dark water, searching for any sign of what had summoned them to this remote location. "I don't like this," Detective Walsh muttered, his eyes sweeping the horizon through night vision binoculars. "We're sitting ducks out here." The boat's depth finder showed they were floating above an underwater canyon that plunged to nearly 1,000 feet. Dr. Sinclair had explained earlier that these deep channels were carved by ancient glaciers, creating hidden pathways that connected the coastal waters to abyssal depths. At exactly midnight, Rachel's phone buzzed. "Look down." All three of them leaned over the side of the boat, their flashlights piercing the black water. At first, there, was nothing but the usual marine darkness. Then, impossibly, a soft blue-green glow began to emanate from the depths below. "Bioluminescence," Dr. Sinclair whispered, his voice filled with awe and terror. But at this scale, the glow intensified, rising from the depths like an underwater aurora. As it ascended, they could make out the massive shape that carried it. Something enormous was approaching from the deep channel, its form defying easy description. Detective Walsh reached for his radio, but Rachel caught his arm. "Wait. Let's see what it wants." The creature broke the surface 50 yards from their boat with barely a ripple, its emergence so gentle it seemed to defy physics. In the moonlight, they could see it was unlike anything in the known biological record. Its body stretched at least 60 feet, covered in what appeared to be scales that pulsed with that same ethereal blue-green light. But it was the eyes that made Rachel's breath catch. Massive, intelligent, and unmistakably aware, they fixed on her with an intensity that suggested recognition. Then it spoke, not with sound, but directly into their minds, its voice carrying the weight of centuries and the depth of oceans. He came seeking truth. He found more than he was prepared to accept. Rachel found her voice, though it emerged as barely a whisper. "Where is Ethan?" Images flooded her consciousness, memories that weren't her own. She saw Ethan in his final days, standing on the rocky shore with his camera, calling to something in the water with playback recordings. She watched him wade deeper, obsessed with documenting what he had discovered, ignoring the warning signs. As the creature grew agitated with his persistence, "He would not leave," the voice continued, "even when shown the consequences of such intrusion. Your kind calls it scientific curiosity. We call it violation." Dr. Sinclair managed to speak, his voice shaking. Is he alive?" The creature's massive head turned toward him, and Rachel felt the weight of something ancient and patient in its gaze. "He sleeps with us now, in the deep places where your kind cannot follow. His voice has joined our song, as was foretold by the first people who learned to respect our domain." Detective Walsh finally found his courage. "You're talking about murder, about kidnapping." A sound that might have been laughter rippled through their minds. "Your concepts do not apply to us. We existed when your species was nothing more than a dream in evolution's eye. We will exist long after you have returned to dust." Rachel felt tears streaming down her face. "Can I see him? Can I say goodbye?" The creature's bioluminescent patterns shifted, and for a moment, Rachel thought she saw something that resembled compassion in those ancient eyes. The creature's bioluminescent patterns shifted into what Rachel somehow understood as agreement. Without warning, the water around their boat began to glow more intensely, and the ocean itself seemed to part, creating a translucent tunnel that descended into the depths. "This is impossible," Dr. Sinclair breathed, his scientific mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. "Many things are impossible until they are not," the voice resonated in their minds. "Your mate's understanding grew beyond the limitations of his kind. He chose to see what others could not." Rachel felt herself drawn to the edge of the boat, compelled by a force she couldn't resist. Detective Walsh grabbed her arm, but she gently pulled away. "I need to see him," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. The water tunnel expanded, creating what appeared to be a breathable pocket of air, extending down into the ocean's depths. Rachel looked back at her companions, seeing her own terror reflected in their faces, before stepping into the impossible passage. The descent felt like floating through liquid starlight. The walls of the tunnel pulsed with the same blue-green luminescence that emanated from the creature, and Rachel could feel the immense pressure of the ocean held back by forces beyond her comprehension. As she descended, the water around her filled with other shapes, smaller creatures that moved with the same purposeful intelligence as the giant being above. They formed an escort, their own bioluminescent patterns creating a constellation of living light in the deep. The tunnel opened into a vast underwater chamber, its walls covered in what looked like coral formations but possessed a geometric precision that suggested intelligent design. Phosphorescent organisms clung to every surface, bathing the space in ethereal light. And there, suspended in the center of the chamber, in what appeared to be a cocoon of luminescent fibers, was Ethan, Rachel's. Heart stopped. He looked peaceful, his eyes closed, his body unchanged from the day he had disappeared. But there was something different about him. A faint glow beneath his skin, as if the bioluminescence had become part of him. "He is not as you remember," the voice warned. "The deep changes all who dwell within it." Rachel approached the cocoon, her hands reaching out to touch the strange material that encased him. The moment her fingers made contact, Ethan's eyes opened, and she gasped. They were no longer the warm brown she remembered, but had taken on the same ethereal blue-green glow as the creatures around them. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate from the water itself. "Rachel." Her name emerged as a sound like whale song, beautiful and haunting. "You shouldn't have come here. I've been looking for you for a year," she whispered, tears flowing freely now. "I never stopped believing I'd find you." Ethan's transformed features showed a sadness that seemed to encompass centuries. "I found something that shouldn't be found, documented something that was meant to remain hidden. They offered me a choice, death or transformation. You could have come home. We could have figured this out together." "No," he said, his voice carrying new depths. "Once you see them, really see them, you understand why they've remained hidden. Humanity isn't ready for this knowledge. We destroy what we don't understand, exploit what we can't control." Around them, the other creatures moved closer, their forms more visible now in the chamber's light. Rachel could see that some had once been human, their shapes still recognizable despite the changes wrought by their underwater existence. "How many?" she asked. "Those who sought too deeply, who refused to accept boundaries," Ethan replied. "Scientists, explorers, dreamers, who couldn't let go of what they had discovered. We become guardians of the secret, protectors of the deep." "You can still come back," Rachel pleaded. "Technology has advanced. People are more open to discovering new species." Ethan's laugh was like the sound of waves breaking on distant shores. "Look around you, Rachel. This isn't just a new species. This is an entire civilization that has watched humanity grow from primitive hunters to a species capable of destroying the planet. They've seen what we do to anything that threatens our sense of dominance." The great creature's voice filled the chamber again. "Your time grows short. The deep calls to those who stay too long." Rachel felt the truth of those words in her bones, a pull toward the bioluminescent walls that promised transformation and eternal mysteries. She forced herself to step back from Ethan's cocoon. "I have to go," she said, her voice breaking. "I know," Ethan replied. "But remember what you've seen. Remember that some mysteries are meant to protect, not be solved." The journey back to the surface felt like awakening from a dream that had lasted centuries. Rachel emerged from the impossible water tunnel gasping, her clothes somehow completely dry despite having descended into the ocean's depths. Detective Walsh and Dr. Sinclair pulled her back into the boat, their faces etched with concern and disbelief. "How long was I gone?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Dr. Sinclair checked his watch, frowning. 47 minutes. We watched you disappear into that tunnel, and we've been monitoring everything from up here." "What did you see?" Detective Walsh demanded, his training warring with the impossibility of what he had witnessed. Rachel looked back at the water where the great creature still waited, its massive form creating gentle swells that rocked their boat. The being's presence felt different now, less alien and more protective. "Ethan is alive," she said finally. "But he's not the same person who disappeared a year ago." She recounted what she had seen in the underwater chamber, the transformation that had claimed her boyfriend, and the choice he had made to become something beyond human. As she spoke, Detective Walsh's expression grew increasingly troubled. "You're talking about abduction, forced transformation, imprisonment," he said. "This thing is holding people against their will." "No," Rachel said firmly. "You don't understand. Ethan chose this. They all did. They saw something that changed their perspective on everything." The creature's voice filled their minds again, patient but final. "Your authorities will come seeking answers. They will bring weapons, scientists, those who would dissect and destroy to satisfy their curiosity. This cannot be permitted." Dr. Sinclair leaned forward, his scientific mind racing. "There has to be a way to study this peacefully, to establish communication, maybe even diplomatic contact." A sound like deep ocean currents filled their consciousness, the creature's equivalent of laughter. "Your species speaks of peace while poisoning our waters with your waste, while harvesting our realm without thought for consequence. We have watched your peaceful contact with other species. We have seen what you call conservation." Rachel felt the truth of those words settling over her like a weight. Humanity's track record with discovering new life forms was less than stellar. Even well-intentioned research often led to exploitation, captivity, or disruption of natural habitats. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you return to your world and choose what story to tell. Choose wisely, for the consequences will determine whether this encounter remains isolated or becomes the beginning of something that will require intervention." Detective Walsh's hand moved instinctively toward his radio. "I have a duty to report what I've witnessed here." The water around them began to churn, and Rachel felt the creature's mood shift toward something more dangerous. "Detective," Dr. Sinclair said urgently, "consider what you're suggesting. If this gets out, if the military gets involved—" "Then we do what?" Detective Walsh snapped. "Pretend this never happened? There are missing persons cases, families who deserve answers. Families who deserve to keep believing their loved ones might still be alive somewhere," Rachel said quietly, "rather than learning they've been transformed into something their loved ones might consider monstrous." The boat's engine suddenly roared to life of its own accord, and they found themselves moving rapidly away from the creature toward the distant lights of the shore. As the distance increased, the great being's voice faded, but carried one final message. 7 days. You have 7 days to decide how this story ends. Choose to protect the mystery, and we will ensure no others are taken. Choose to expose us, and we will defend ourselves as we have for millennia." As they approached the harbor, Rachel realized that their midnight encounter had fundamentally changed all three of them. They now carried knowledge that could revolutionize human understanding of the planet's ocean depths, or trigger a conflict with beings whose power they had only glimpsed. The weight of that choice would follow them back to shore, back to their normal lives, back to a world that wasn't ready for the truth they now carried. 7 days to decide between wonder and catastrophe, between protecting an ancient secret and satisfying human curiosity. 7 days to determine whether some mysteries were worth preserving, even at the cost of unanswered questions that would haunt them forever. The three of them sat in Detective Walsh's office at dawn, the fluorescent lights harsh against their salt-stained clothes and exhausted faces. None of them had spoken during the drive back from the harbor, each lost in processing what they had witnessed. Now surrounded by the mundane reality of case files and coffee-stained paperwork, their midnight encounter felt like something from another world. Detective Walsh poured his fourth cup of coffee, his hands trembling slightly as he set the pot down. "I've been a cop for 22 years. I've seen overdoses, murders, accidents that would give most people nightmares. But this—" He gestured helplessly at his computer screen, where he had been staring at a blank incident report for the past hour. "How do I write this up? Subject abducted by intelligent sea creature, voluntarily transformed into amphibious being, currently residing in underwater civilization? They'll have me committed for psychiatric evaluation." Dr. Sinclair sat hunched over his own laptop, reviewing the sonar data from their expedition. The readings showed massive shapes moving in the deep water, but the data looked like equipment malfunction to anyone who hadn't witnessed what they had seen. The scientific community would face the same problem, he said quietly. Even with our recordings, our measurements, our testimony, without physical evidence, we'd be dismissed as delusional. Rachel stared out the window at the gray Seattle morning, watching early commuters hurry past with their coffee and newspapers, oblivious to the fact that everything they thought they knew about their world had changed overnight. Maybe that's the point, she said. Maybe some discoveries are meant to remain hidden because the world isn't ready for them. Detective Walsh slammed his coffee cup down, splashing liquid across his desk. That's not how this works, Rachel. I have a missing person case. I have families who've been waiting for answers. Mrs. Henderson calls me every month asking about her son, who disappeared near Olympic National Park 3 years ago. The Yamadas still hold out hope that their daughter might be found alive. And now you know they might be, Dr. Sinclair said gently, just not in the way their families could ever accept. So I should lie to them? Tell them their loved ones are dead when they might be living some transformed existence underwater. Rachel turned from the window, her eyes red with exhaustion and unshed tears. Would it be kinder to tell Mrs. Henderson that her son chose to become something no longer recognizably human? That he's part of a species that considers us potential threats to be managed? The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of the city waking up. Detective Walsh opened his case files, spreading photographs of missing persons across his desk. 7 faces stared back at them: hikers, photographers, marine biologists, all who had vanished near the Olympic Peninsula waters over the past 5 years. 7 people, he said. 7 families who deserve to know the truth. 7 people who found something they couldn't walk away from, Rachel corrected. Just like Ethan couldn't walk away. Dr. Sinclair closed his laptop and rubbed his eyes. There's another consideration. If we expose this, if we bring the military and government scientists into the picture, we might be signing a death warrant for an entire civilization that's managed to remain hidden for millennia. Or we might be preventing future abductions, Detective Walsh countered. The creature promised no more would be taken if we kept the secret, Rachel said. Isn't that worth something? Detective Walsh gathered the photographs, staring at each face. And what if it was lying? What if keeping quiet means more people disappear? His phone rang, startling all 3 of them. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but when he answered, the voice was familiar. Captain Morrison from the Coast Guard. Detective Walsh, we've been monitoring unusual sonar activity in the deep waters off Olympic National Park. Large formations moving in coordinated patterns. My marine biologist is suggesting we might have discovered a previously unknown species of whale, possibly an entire pod. Detective Walsh met Rachel's eyes across the desk. What kind of timeline are you looking at for investigation? We're assembling a research team now. Full scientific expedition with underwater photography equipment, tissue sampling capability. Should be ready to deploy within the week. The line went dead, leaving the 3 of them staring at each other in the growing morning light. The creature's 7-day ultimatum suddenly took on new urgency. It's already starting, Dr. Sinclair whispered. Whether we report it or not, they're coming. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine as she realized their choice had just been taken away from them. Rachel found herself standing at the edge of Rialto Beach 3 days after their midnight encounter, watching Coast Guard vessels on the horizon through binoculars. The research expedition had arrived ahead of schedule, bringing with it an array of sophisticated equipment that would have made Ethan's photography gear look primitive by comparison. Dr. Sinclair stood beside her, his face grim as he tracked the movements of the ships through his own field glasses. 2 research vessels, 1 Coast Guard cutter, and what looks like a Navy submarine tender. They're not taking any chances. Have you tried to contact them? To warn them? Rachel asked. Aye, submitted a formal advisory through the university, recommending extreme caution in deep-water exploration of the region. It was politely dismissed. Detective Walsh approached from the parking area, his radio crackling with updates from the maritime operation. They've deployed 3 deep-sea ROVs and are conducting systematic sonar mapping of the entire canyon system. The team leader is Dr. Amanda Chen from NOAA. No relation to you, Rachel. And she's describing this as potentially the most significant marine discovery of the decade. Rachel lowered her binoculars, feeling sick. They have no idea what they're dealing with. Maybe that's for the best, Dr. Sinclair said quietly. Maybe ignorance will protect them. As if summoned by their words, Rachel's phone buzzed. The message was from Ethan's number again. They come with weapons disguised as science. The deep grows restless. A second message followed immediately. Come to the water. Alone. Last warning. Detective Walsh grabbed her arm as she started walking toward the surf. Rachel, no. We don't know what it's planning. I know exactly what it's planning, she said, pulling free. The same thing any species does when it feels threatened. It's going to defend itself. She waded into the cold Pacific water, feeling the familiar tingle of otherworldly presence as the waves reached her knees. The response was immediate. The ocean around her began to glow with that ethereal bioluminescence, and she felt herself being lifted by currents that defied natural law. This time, the communication was different. Instead of the creature's ancient voice, she heard Ethan speaking through the connection, his transformed consciousness serving as translator between 2 worlds. They've brought weapons, Rachel. Military sonar that could shatter our deep chambers. Sampling equipment designed to take pieces of us for study. They see us as specimens, not as people. Can't you just hide? Go deeper? Stay away from them? The deep waters are our home, our nursery, our sacred spaces. Would you abandon Seattle because strangers arrived with intent to dissect your city? Through the telepathic link, Rachel felt the presence of hundreds of minds, the transformed humans who had chosen to join the underwater civilization, and the ancient beings who had existed in the depths since before recorded history. Their collective fear and anger was overwhelming. What can I do? She whispered. Convince them to leave. Make them understand that some discoveries come with consequences they cannot predict or control. Rachel found herself back on the beach, her clothes dry once again, facing Dr. Sinclair and Detective Walsh. But now she could see the water differently, could perceive the massive shapes moving beneath the surface, converging on the research vessels from multiple directions. We have to get to that ship, she said urgently. Now. Detective Walsh was already on his radio, trying to raise the Coast Guard frequency. This is Detective Walsh, Seattle PD. I need to speak with your expedition leader immediately. You have a potential safety situation developing. The response was dismissive. Negative, Detective. This is a federal operation. Please clear the area. Through her enhanced perception, Rachel could see the creatures positioning themselves beneath the research vessels. The ancient intelligence that guided them was patient, but she could feel that patience eroding as the ship's sonar pulses grew. More intensive. They're going to attack, she said. Not out of malice, but out of necessity. They see this as an invasion. Dr. Sinclair grabbed his emergency beacon. I have contacts at NOAA. If I can reach Dr. Chen directly. There's no time, Rachel said. She could feel the creature's resolve hardening, could sense the moment of decision approaching like a storm front. The water around the research vessels began to churn. The water beneath the research vessels erupted in a display of bioluminescent fury that could be seen from shore even in the afternoon light. Rachel watched in horror as massive shapes breached the surface around the ships, their ancient forms dwarfing the human vessels like toys in a bathtub. The lead research ship, NOAA's Pacific Explorer, rocked violently as something enormous passed beneath its hull. Emergency alarms blared across the water, and Rachel could hear shouting voices carried on the wind. Jesus Christ, Detective Walsh breathed, his radio crackling with panicked transmissions from the Coast Guard. Mayday, Mayday, we have multiple, large marine contacts. Vessel taking on water. Request immediate assistance. Dr. Sinclair grabbed Rachel's arm. You have to stop this. If they sink those ships— I'm trying, Rachel said, wading back into the surf. The moment the water reached her waist, she felt the overwhelming rage of the deep creatures flooding her consciousness. Their fury was ancient and terrible, accumulated over millennia of watching their domain slowly poisoned and invaded by surface dwellers. Through the telepathic connection, she felt Ethan's transformed presence struggling to maintain control, his human consciousness serving as the only bridge between two incompatible worldviews. Rachel, they won't listen to reason. His voice echoed in her mind. The elders remember when your kind first learned to build boats. They've watched every innovation, every intrusion. They see this expedition as the beginning of the end. On the horizon, one of the creatures fully breached the surface near the Coast Guard cutter. Even at this distance, its size was staggering. Easily 100 feet of serpentine body, covered in those pulsing bioluminescent patterns. The ship's crew opened fire with their deck gun, the sharp cracks of gunshots echoing across the water. The bullets had no visible effect, but the act of aggression sent waves of fury through the underwater collective. Rachel felt their restraint, snapping like an overstressed cable. "Stop shooting!" she screamed, though she knew her voice couldn't carry that far. The creature's response was swift and coordinated. The Pacific Explorer suddenly listed heavily to starboard as something massive struck its hull. Through her enhanced perception, Rachel could feel the precision of the attack. Not random violence, but calculated intimidation designed to disable rather than destroy. They're trying to drive them away without killing anyone, she realized, speaking aloud to Dr. Sinclair and Detective Walsh. But if the ships don't retreat— The Coast Guard cutter fired again, this time deploying depth charges that exploded in brilliant flashes beneath the surface. The underwater detonation sent shockwaves through the deep channels, and Rachel felt the creature's pain as if it were her own. "No," she whispered, stumbling deeper into the water. "Please, just leave. Just go away." But it was too late. The depth charges had shattered something fundamental in the creature's restraint. Through Ethan's fading connection, she felt the ancient intelligence making a decision that would change everything. "They've crossed the line." Ethan's voice was different now, more alien, as his human consciousness was overwhelmed by the collective anger of his new kind. No more warnings. No more mercy. The ocean around the research fleet began to boil with activity as dozens of massive forms converged on the ships. This time there would be no careful precision, no attempt to simply frighten the intruders away. Rachel felt herself being pulled deeper into the water by currents that seemed to have their own intelligence. Behind her, she could hear Detective Walsh shouting her name, hear Dr. Sinclair calling for backup on his radio. But the sounds were growing distant, muffled by the roar of an ocean in revolt. As the water closed over her head, Rachel's last clear thought was a desperate plea to whatever force had brought her this far. Let her reach the ships in time to prevent a massacre that would doom both species to eternal conflict. The deep called to her with promises of transformation and understanding. But first, she had to try to save the very people whose curiosity had triggered this ancient war. Rachel found herself transported through the water with impossible speed, carried by currents that defied physics toward the chaos erupting around the research fleet. As she approached the Pacific Explorer, she could see crew members abandoning ship, their life rafts scattered across waters that churned with massive hostile forms. The great creature that had first contacted them rose from the depths beside the sinking vessel, its ancient eyes fixed on Rachel as she was deposited on the ship's tilting deck. Water cascaded from her clothes, but she remained completely dry, protected by forces she was only beginning to understand. "You came." The creature's voice resonated through her mind, carrying notes of surprise and something that might have been respect. "I had to try," Rachel gasped, steadying herself against the ship's railing as another impact rocked the vessel. This isn't what Ethan would have wanted. Around them, the scene was apocalyptic. 3 massive beings had surrounded the Coast Guard cutter, their bioluminescent patterns flashing in coordinated sequences that Rachel somehow understood as tactical communication. The ship's crew continued firing, their bullets ineffective, against creatures that had survived in the deepest places of the ocean for millennia. "Your mate understood the price of revelation," the ancient voice continued. "He chose wisdom over curiosity. These others choose aggression over understanding." "Because they're afraid," Rachel said, her voice carrying across the water with unnatural clarity. "They don't know what you are. They only know you're threatening them." Through her enhanced perception, she could feel the terror radiating from the human crews. To them, this was a monster attack, an incomprehensible assault by creatures from humanity's darkest nightmares. They had no context for understanding that they were facing an intelligent civilization defending its territory. "Can you stop this?" she asked the creature. "Can you call them off? The deep has already decided. Your kind has proven its nature. With weapons and explosives, there will be no peaceful coexistence." Rachel closed her eyes, feeling the weight of failure settling over her. Then, through the telepathic connection, she sensed something else. A familiar presence fighting against the collective will of the transformed. "Ethan," she whispered. His consciousness reached her through the chaos, weakened but still recognizably human. "Rachel, I can feel their fear. The crew, the scientists, they're not conquerors. They're just people trying to understand their world. The elders won't listen to me anymore," she said. "I'm losing what humanity I had left." "Then don't speak. To the elders. Speak to the others like us, the transformed. We still remember what it was like to be human." Rachel opened her eyes and extended her awareness through the water, seeking the minds of those who had once been like her. She found them scattered throughout the attacking force, dozens of human consciousnesses that had been changed but not entirely lost. "Please," she broadcast to them all, her mental voice carrying the weight of desperate hope. "Remember what it was like to be curious instead of wise, to seek knowledge instead of protecting secrets. These people aren't enemies. They're us, before we knew better." The response was immediate. One by one, the transformed humans began to resist the collective will, their lingering humanity creating discord in the creature's coordinated attack. The assault faltered as individual beings hesitated, their movements becoming uncertain. The great creature beside her writhed in frustration as its perfect coordination dissolved into chaos. "You contaminate them with your weakness," it accused. "I remind them of their strength," Rachel replied. "The strength to choose compassion over revenge." Around the research fleet, the attacking creatures began to withdraw, their bioluminescent patterns shifting from aggressive red to confused, swirling blues and greens. The immediate danger was passing, but Rachel could feel the ancient intelligence's rage building toward something far more dangerous than a simple attack. "You have won this moment," the creature said, its mental voice carrying the weight of eons. "But you have also ensured that harder choices must be made. The deep will not risk exposure. If your kind cannot be driven away, then the surface itself must be cleansed." The words chilled Rachel to her core as she realized what the creature was suggesting. Not just an attack on the research ships, but something that would eliminate the threat of human discovery permanently. The ocean around Rachel began to glow with an intensity that hurt to look at directly. Through her connection to the deep consciousness, she felt something ancient and terrible stirring in the deepest trenches of the Pacific, something that made the creatures she had already encountered seem small by comparison. "What are you doing?" she asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "Calling upon the deepest ones," the creature replied, its mental voice carrying reverential terror. Those who sleep in the abyssal trenches, who have not stirred, since your kind first learned to sail. They will rise, and when they do, your coastal cities will learn why the ocean should be feared. Images flooded Rachel's mind. Visions of tsunamis that would dwarf any natural disaster, of creatures so massive they could drag entire islands beneath the waves. The ancient civilization had safeguards against discovery that made their earlier displays of power seem gentle by comparison. "Wait," Rachel said desperately. "Give me one more chance. Let me try something else. Your species has proven itself incapable of wisdom." The time for chances has passed, but even as the creature spoke, Rachel felt another presence pressing against her consciousness. Not Ethan this time, but something older, deeper. One of the true ancients, older than the creature she faced, older perhaps than human civilization itself. "Little surface dweller," this new voice whispered like the sound of continental shelves grinding together. "You offer something in exchange for your species' survival?" Rachel's heart raced as she realized she was being given one final opportunity. "Yes, anything. Join us willingly. Become the bridge between your kind and ours. Ensure that the secret is kept not through fear, but through understanding." The choice was immediate and absolute. She could feel the transformation beginning before she even gave her consent, her human physiology already adapting to breathe water, her consciousness expanding to accommodate the vast knowledge of the deep. But with the change came clarity. She understood now what Ethan had seen, what had driven him to make the same choice. The creatures weren't monsters. They were guardians of a planet that humans were slowly destroying. Their protection of the deep places was all that stood between the surface world and ecological collapse on a scale humanity couldn't imagine. "I accept," she said, feeling her legs fusing together, her skin taking on the familiar bioluminescent patterns. "But the attacks stop. The research ships are allowed to leave with their crews intact, and you never again threaten the surface world with total destruction." "Agreed," the ancient voice rumbled. "But you will ensure that no others follow the path your mate took. You will be our eyes on the surface, our voice when wisdom must be shared." Rachel felt herself sinking beneath the waves for the final time, her human life ending as something far more complex began. Around her, the attacking creatures withdrew completely, their bioluminescent farewell creating aurora patterns in the water as they returned to the depths. On the surface, the survivors would report equipment malfunction, aggressive whales, freak weather. Dr. Sinclair would publish papers about unusual marine behavior, carefully omitting any mention of intelligence or communication. Detective Walsh would close the missing persons cases with notations about presumed drowning, understanding that some truths were too dangerous to record. Years later, marine biologists would note the gradual improvement in deep-water ecosystems around the Olympic Peninsula. Commercial fishing in the area would be mysteriously successful, with fish populations showing unusual resilience. Occasional reports of helpful whales guiding lost vessels to safety would be dismissed as maritime folklore. And in the deepest places, where sunlight never penetrated, Rachel would serve as humanity's ambassador to an ancient world, ensuring that two species that should never have met could coexist in the spaces between truth and mystery. Sometimes love meant letting go. Sometimes protection required sacrifice. And sometimes the greatest discoveries were the ones that remained forever hidden in the depths of the ocean, guarded by those who understood that some secrets were worth keeping.